Welcome to our webinar this evening. Our topic is how to feel safe in groups. And we had a little poll that's running. I don't know, some of you may be able to see it, or at least saw it when you came in. And our question was whether the groups you wanted to feel safe in were public groups like a concert or public event, or private groups that you chose to join like a workshop, or family, or all of the above. And we're about evenly split between public groups like concerts and workshops and all of the above. So, and also we asked if you, were like just a little unsafe, not safe at all, or totally safe. And pretty much people are falling in the middle of like, sometimes safe, sometimes not so safe. So it's clear that this is a topic of interest. Most of us have some experiences of being a little bit safe or not safe. I'll just share the results right here for you. So those of you who took the poll can see kind of where we've landed. Kind of in the middle, and just the whole thing of not feeling safe. So let's see. In this this webinar here, this brief webinar, we're going to explore this topic at some length, and Cindy will be minding the chat for me. So please feel free at any time to just make a comment or question, or pass on something of interest to the group. So I'd like to invite you to do a little thought experiment for yourself. Because oftentimes we just have a body reaction to a situation and we sort of develop an aversion to it. We don't really break down what is it about the situation that is making us feel this way. So just as a quick thought experiment, just think about when you felt safe. If you have an experience of being safe in a group, what were the characteristics of the group? Why were you there? And what was your body state, or what was your feeling state when you were there? And as you think about that, the invitation is to compare that to a time when you did not feel safe. And rather than just focusing on your own feeling, compare the characteristics of the group that you didn't feel safe in, and your reason for being there, and the state that you entered that group in. And just see if anything comes to mind as we go through this webinar in terms of, what was it about that situation or that group that might have triggered that? Is it always true for you, or is it sometimes true for you? Because there's different things that are useful depending on what brings that state to you, what triggers that state in you. So you might keep this in mind as we go through this webinar. Now, groups are, unfortunately, sort of a fact of life. We need them. They are necessary for us. They're, most of us have, many of us have, the majority of us have a love-hate relationship with groups. Real extroverts, you love any group, but most of us have a love-hate relationship with groups. And partly this is because groups are complex. As soon as we start to put a group of people together, we run into different kinds of expectations, of reciprocity that people have in group. How do we handle give and taking? We have the issues of how do we make meaning together, what's in my head and your head, and how do we create a sense of being a member of a group and knowing the rules to follow. Oftentimes the rules of belonging in a group are not obvious. They're things that have just evolved or have been decided by a group, and you are maybe joining and don't know them. An example of that is I just was guest teaching at a training recently, and I knew when I walked into the group that there were different rules of belonging. And one of the rules was of observing non-binary gender. And so I had to learn what the pronouns were to use to fit into that group, and how to belong and how to be respectful in that group. So there's always hidden rules of belonging. There's sometimes overt rules of belonging, but we're always navigating the complexity of what people create when they get together. And the last one is like, we need groups, and yet there's hierarchy in groups. Some people, we're not equal in groups. And sometimes that can be intimidating and, upsetting. So there's lots of things that go on with groups that give us this kind of complex reaction to them. And a lot of us over time have had unpleasant experiences. And so we have some fear when we come into a group. So one of the things to think about, and the reason I asked that question at the beginning is, about what do you mean by group? What's the characteristics of the group? It's important to know for yourself whether there are certain size groups you're more comfortable with, if it is size that's a factor for you, if it's a public group that you're more upset by, like strangers that you don't know, or if it's just, it's a private group that has a function or purpose, like a workshop or a religious group that might meet on Sundays. It's also things like, how long have people been together? Are you joining a group where everybody else knows each other and you feel like the odd person out, or are you, somebody who's been there for a while? Are people in the group familiar with each other or not? These things like size, how familiar people are, how long they've been in the group, they are factors that create that kind of sense of group culture. And if we're joining a group, we can feel that, but don't always know to look for and recognize, like, what are the rules in this group? How do people get along? Who's on top? Who's not? How do I play the game? So a lot of what makes it both challenging and the opportunities in joining a group is, why are you there? And does the reason that you're there align with the group's purpose? Because sometimes you may have a reason for being there, but it isn't really what the group's about, and you can feel out of sync. So it's important to think about the characteristics of the group. Like, what is that group about, and why are you there? So as you've thought about, like, when are you safe and when are you not, I'm curious if anyone wants to put on the chat maybe some distinctions that have come to mind about, well, yeah, I'm more safe if these conditions are present in a group, unless if this is the case. Like, I might feel more safe walking into a group if I know it's a workshop group and I know the material that we're going to study, than I would walking into classroom when I was brand new and I didn't know anybody and I didn't know the materials. And so managing our own level of expectation and agitation is something we can actually help ourselves with by thinking ahead about, what is the characteristic of the group that I'm going to join? Why am I there? So since we're talking about groups and safety, let's talk a little bit about safety. Safety is a really amazing sort of black box word. Safety is an experience that we have. It means different things to different people. I have a cousin who is a rock climber, and he can have a feeling of safety while he's hanging, 40 feet up in the air on the side of a cliff. That's not something I would ever feel safe doing, but for him, that's not something that his brain and his body experience as dangerous. So his experience of safety is very different than mine in that particular context. Some of us have grown up in situations where we really haven't got a baseline sense of what safety is. So when you feel safe, your brain is actually, your prefrontal cortex is in harmony with your emotional brain. It can regulate and modify the emotional signals coming from your brain. So you can think, you can reason. It's more likely that when you feel safe, your body will be relaxed. And your social engagement system, your ability to be conversational with people and find words and feel like you can respond appropriately, will be online. When we start to get afraid, we switch systems, literally, in our body and brain. And our prefrontal cortex is offline. Our emotional brain is running the show. Our thinking becomes clouded. Our body is tense and reactive. And it's harder for us to find, our breathing is usually high and shallow. It's harder for us to find words and find flow in an easy way in our body. And sometimes, it's the reason for the fear is internal, but we sort of project that onto the situation. We think maybe groups are why we feel that way. So one of the things to distinguish is this something I'm doing in myself? Like I'm telling myself something or creating a fear, or you might have a phobia, social phobia, claustrophobia. Or is there something really about the group? And being able to make a distinction about that is really helpful. So let's unpack safety just a little bit more, because there's lots of different aspects to safety. One is actually physically being safe. If you've ever been in a situation where you physically weren't safe or you came to harm, that's going to be a situation that creates feelings of fear in you, most likely. Or you may have traumatic experiences that sort of bleed into the current situation. So being able to get a definition of safe for yourself, or you might have been in a place where you had one view of the world and people didn't respect differences. So just really attending to physical safety, emotional, social safety, mental and spiritual safety, and understanding that we have, there's things we can influence in the world. We have power without, but we also have power within in terms of how we approach something to create a sense of safety for ourselves. So we're going to break these down a little bit and look more at these aspects of safety. So there are underlying factors, and this is like, safety is kind of an inside job. My cousin hanging off the rocks there done an awful lot of preparation to be there. And he had a way of keeping himself calm, keeping his brain online, keeping himself really functional on the side of that rock face. Interestingly enough, he fell one time, 40 feet drop, very, very lucky to survive it. And he had to do obviously a lot of physical healing, but he took on the task of doing emotional healing as well, and was able to get back out and climb again. So even though we have a trauma, it can bias our assessment of the situation that we're in, or we may have had an experience that made us afraid. The brain's plastic, and we can actually learn. So it's really important to get a sense of what is safety. What is a reference experience? A way for me to know if I'm safe? Is my body relaxed? Is my mind alert, relaxed? Do I feel comfortable in my own skin? Am I able to engage with my environment and with others? So those are all things that actually contribute to our experience of being safe or not being safe. Um, so just a moment here. Safe is characterized by these things. Now, these are underlying, circuits in our nervous system, brain states that we're neither collapsed or frozen, where there's a fluidity to our movement. You were looking at Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory. It's like our social engagement system is online. That means our heart is literally connected to our face. We're able to pick out human voices from the background. We're able to engage with people, find words. We can assess the risk of situations. We can keep our rational ability to think online, and there's a sense of calm. There's a sense of comfort. So some people have not really grown up with that experience, but beginning to identify what might that feel like for me to feel safe is an important step towards developing the ability to actually return to that state if you leave it. So one of the things about having had difficult experiences, like my cousin, is if you can imagine if he got back up on the rocks without having done his own work, that he might be really tense, and he might actually make himself get himself in a difficult situation by not being able to assess his situation accurately. So sometimes we get like stuck, our brain gets stuck with expectations, with memories of fear that haven't, fearful experiences that haven't been digested. We're not able to actually connect our emotional felt experiences with language and integrate that experience. And so if our mind is stuck, our body tends to follow. Sometimes, we have a physical experience and we might actually get into a situation and have a bit of a panic attack because the body remembers something and that actually scares us. And so it's really important to, if you have a pattern around a particular set of triggers, to kind of walk backwards and find out what might be affecting you there. Now, the cool thing about all of these, being triggered is it's your body, it's your brain. And one of the things that we always have access to is our breath. So you might be in this situation in a group that feels scary, and yet you still have, if you can look around and assess, no, really physically I'm safe, there's probably not a huge risk for me. And for most of us in the groups that we're in, that's true. So how can I dial back down my alarm system? How can I turn the alarm bell down? And one of the ways is actually through the breath. Some of us did grow up in families where we didn't really get a chance to experience acceptance and safety. So there's some things that can kind of blind us to being able to make a fair assessment. And these are factors in families, like there can be rules, like, the eldest child always is right, or daddy decides, and it's not about fairness. And there's not even power in a family. So if we've been at the receiving end of dominance in our family and there wasn't a lot of fairness, we may sort of, spread that experience like peanut butter from our family of origin to the groups that we're encountering now. So it's important to just remember, like, that was my family. Let me have a real look at this group now. And, did I have to kind of fight for a place? Or did I have choice or not? So was there somebody who I could turn to that was safe in my family? These experiences that we get in our family around safety are really, they do shape us. And so part of the reason for that first question was, what are the characteristics of this group? What are the characteristics of my family? Can I start to make some discernment between the different factors that trigger my own reaction to groups? Because when I can start to separate them, I can start to choose. I can start to look afresh at the groups that I'm joining. So this is a little exploration of, what are the situations that you might find yourself, what are the kinds of triggers, and how you might approach those. Of course, your physical safety is always first. You need to be here to even have this concern. So being able to assess the group, are these people I know? Is there somebody with me that I know? Am I familiar with the place? Can I get familiar with the place? When I would travel and I would be getting off a plane after, 20 hours in the air, looking for somebody that I'd never met who might be holding a little placard and would be putting me in a car to go to a venue in a foreign country, I developed a whole set of protocols for me to manage that, because that was kind of scary. So I would ask my organizer to, give me a description of the person who's going to meet me. And I would have a question to ask that person to make sure they were the right person. And I would have checked out the hotel in advance, thanks to the age of the internet. So I would have done things to make sure that I was going to be physically safe when I got there, so that I could be calmer when I was in that situation. So, sometimes something about a place, you have some history with it, sometimes you don't. And since I did work in China quite a lot, and I had a lawyer whose family had a business in China, she used to tell me, sort of jokingly, but also seriously in a way, like, when you go into a room, always know where the exit is. So part of assessing physical safety, if that's a trigger for you, is really giving yourself permission and time to like scope it out and do what you need to, trusting your body's reaction a little bit there to help you figure out, what do I need to do to help myself be calmer? What do I need to know? And giving yourself the time to find that out. I know that's been a successful strategy for a lot of people in dealing with physical triggers. So I'd like to invite you to play with this yourself. Think of a time when you actually felt like you maybe weren't safe, but you actually were fine. And if you look back on that situation now, what would you have needed to know that would have increased your confidence, that would have given you more of a sense of comfort and a sense that I'm going to be okay? So I'd love to have a few notes on the chat as you play with this for a moment. I'll give you a little minute to just think about these distinctions and see what comes up for you. So love to hear some comments from somebody, either on the chat or just speak up. Okay. Not seeing much right now in the chat. I don't know if I'm seeing it accurately. Oh, great. Here's a comment from, yeah, here's a great comment from Allie. She says, just having a benevolent physical contact reassures me in a group. That's a great idea. If you're going someplace and you're not sure, take somebody with you. You know, or even, you know, take something like your lucky rabbit's foot, even something that you can just, you know, have that physical connection with something that is reassuring. And then someone, Kalendra's talking about walking back, again, walking back to her car late at night. That's a scary place, you know, with another person. So we're really social animals when we can take somebody with us, or even, you know, the sense of somebody being with us. It's a lot easier for us to handle scary situations like that. So that's a really great strategy. Yeah, cool. Thanks for the sharing. So that's one kind of safety, is just physically being safe. Another kind of safety is what I call social emotional safety. And many of us have had experiences in groups where we felt shamed, or we felt guilty, or we felt like contempt, like they didn't welcome us and they didn't accept us. Or we might have felt, in a minor case, we might have felt embarrassment. So yeah, there's also a suggestion here of, right. So people are giving us some really lovely suggestions on the chat here. You might just check that out. Being able to ask people for help is a great suggestion. You know, being prepared and knowing what you're going into. So one of the things that, you know, that's important about shame and guilt, these are social emotions. And these are emotions that seem to have evolved in us for the purpose of helping us stay in our groups, you know, to increase our belonging. And so often when we find ourselves the target of shame, there can be power dynamics or bullying going on in a group. And that's, you know, something that may really not personally have something to do with us. It may be a whole set of dynamics that belong to the group. And shame and guilt become toxic for us when we make group dynamics be about ourself. When we make group dynamics be about us being bad or not right. You know, being in a group is just being in a group. I mean, people are there, people are people. So it's really important for us to really be able to, in a certain way, step back and not make the sense of shame, to recognize that moment of like where we feel like, oh my gosh, I've really messed up, or oh, I've done something wrong, I'm bad. If we can separate that I've done something that doesn't follow the group's rules from the I'm a bad person, we can actually get some space to actually look at and think about, hey, what just happened, right? So creating, I call it the imaginary step back. So when something happens and you have that moment of, sucking in a breath and holding it, or startle, being able to just recognize that reaction in yourself, take a deep breath, and imagine that you can step back and look at the situation, look at yourself, look at the group, look at the positive intention behind that reaction yourself. Like, wow, I want to belong and I just broke a rule and I'm feeling bad. Maybe if somebody did something to you in a group, look at the things that might be driving them. It's like, what would make a person do that? Maybe they feel ashamed, or maybe they feel bad and they're just, they don't know you and they're reacting. This is something that happens, unfortunately, often on the internet, where we don't have face-to-face experiences with people. So, just really looking at being able to take that step back, being able to take a breath, look at the situation. What's your motivation for being in the group? Why might the other people be in the group? That step back begins to create the space that we need to keep our brain, our prefrontal cortex, our reasoning self, back in action. And most of us, when we feel unsafe, our impulse is to get away, is to run. So being able to just take that step back, take the breath, really let your vision clear and look around you and decide, is this really true? Do I really need to take action? What's the best action for me to take in this situation? Gives you a lot more options and resources than you would have had if you just reacted and didn't question it. So, yeah. So here's another little chance to apply this to yourself. You might think of a time in a group where you didn't feel safe, and maybe socially not safe or emotionally not safe. And just really ask yourself, okay, let me review that. Let me take that step back in my mind's eye right now, and separate yourself from the situation. So then you can ask yourself, is this really about what's happening now? Is that really that serious? Is this something I can just say, okay, yeah, I didn't know that rule. I got corrected a few times in that group that I went to where I used the wrong pronoun, and it's like I can be okay with myself. I can have compassion for myself and say, yeah, I didn't know that rule. I'm not practiced at that. Or is this a place from the past, the shadow of the past, where you're reacting to what's happening now as if it was that past event, right? Another question to ask yourself is this me or is this, the group? Maybe something's happening in the group. Like I've walked into groups where they're already going and something is going on, and I might not feel very good in there. I might be uncomfortable, but it's not about me. It's something that's already been happening for the group. And finally, is this a group you need to be with? Do you really need the group? Is there something for you there? Because focusing on your reason for being there can often make it easier to deal with whatever's going on. And do you need to negotiate with somebody about your membership in the group, or do you need to negotiate with yourself? So those are just some helpful things to think about. Try them out. See if you reflect on that situation and you imagine taking that step back. Love to see some things on the chat. If there's anything that comes up for you that was helpful when you take that step back. So give you a minute to think about that and see if any has some suggestions or comments. I like Cindy's comment here. She says, being able to be honest and vulnerable with my unease helps me. And being honest about that brings her into contact with other people, because sometimes you're not the only one that feels that way. And so being able to say, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable here, maybe I don't know the rules, that's a way to begin to create connection with people who might feel like you, and to be able to kind of manage the anxiety there. Yeah. Sometimes Ali says, I just can't make myself feel comfortable, and I can accept that I don't. And sometimes just accepting the fact that, okay, this is how I feel. I'm not, that's okay. Maybe I'm just, there's something here that's making me a little anxious, and I'm just going to accept that feeling and roll with it. And just that acceptance can help calm you down. Let's see. Let me just check my chat here really quickly. It's one of the challenges Karen makes up when is like you're required to be there, and the group has a hidden issue or rule that they're kind of letting you know that you're broken. What do you do in a case like that? What I've found is really, really helpful is it's like based on Dan Siegel's work of name it so that you can claim it and tame it. And for the most people, I was in a group, I was actually leading a piece of work in a group, and I could tell I wasn't breathing, and I could see that nobody else was breathing. So I actually asked for a bathroom break, got out of the situation, this is me taking my step, went to the bathroom, sat there for a moment, let myself breathe and reflect on what was going on, and I realized that I felt like I was walking on eggshells. And I went back into the group and I named that. I said, I'm so grateful that you brought me here. And I just have to say that I feel right now like I'm kind of walking on eggshells. Maybe somebody could tell me if that's that's true, or there's something I should know. And my being willing to claim my feelings actually was an opening for the group, so that the group leader could own something that she hadn't been able to own before in that situation. So honesty is often a really, really, more than we believe, a useful strategy. Yeah, so Sidra is saying, I've been told as a child, let somebody, don't ask questions, basically. Let somebody else ask it, take the safe route. And there's a way when we do that we stop authoring ourselves. We stop actually feeling our own agency, and we put ourselves into a passive role. And so that's kind of a double loss. It's like there's an injunction against asking something, but there's also a kind of harm to self of not being able to express yourself. And this is one of those cases where, sometimes, as Ali said, we just need to accept the fear and try it, because we'll learn by doing something that we're capable of it. One of the ways to break old rules that we got, to handle old rules that we got from our family, is to mindfully break the rule, mindfully try it in as safe a situation as we can see, where we feel that inner injunction, is to just make a decision of like, I know I'm scared and I'm going to try this. I'm going to ask a question. Because our nervous system will learn from experience that, hey, maybe I don't have to believe that old rule. Maybe there's a way for me to do this. So, it's like reality testing. This is what I was told. Let me find out if this is true. Let me check it out. Recognizing that there's a lovely thing from Kalendra. Recognizing something's going on for the other person. Like maybe it's a shared misunderstanding. And, maybe they're upset too. So, being able to see yourself taking that step, seeing there's two people, or there's me and a few people that are part of making this communication right now. And, if I take responsibility for my part and don't take on responsibility for theirs, what possibilities might that open up for both of us? So these are really wonderful suggestions and comments. Thank you so much. I'm going to move ahead here just to suggest a couple of resources. if we have an inner critic or we've taken on some injunctions from our family that are less than kind, maybe even a little mean, an inner bully that shows up when we try to do something in a group. There's a book by Sarah Payton called Your Resonant Self, which is a really great book on providing yourself with self-compassion. There's also research coming out of UC Berkeley in the Science of Greater Good group showing that self-compassion, and Kristen Neff is one of the lead researchers in this, is actually more important than self-esteem. In other words, being able to give ourselves grace and recover is actually a more useful skill than getting it right the first time. So this sense of resilience and self-care, self-compassion in situations that might be scary or challenging for us is actually a huge resource. And if we do have a really nasty inner critic there, I really appreciate Andrew Beaumont's chapter on self-hatred in his book Towards a Spiritual Psychotherapy, and on reforming our relationships with parents who might have given us those rules. I think there's another great suggestion here. It's like really, we're talking about making distinctions so that you can really find yourself in a situation that you might have sort of made a big hairball out of because of a bad past experience. Karen's also making the point of, sometimes you're like on the leading edge of the group and you say something too early or they're not ready to hear it. There's some work done by a colleague of mine, Michael Grinder, who looked at women's culture and men's culture in corporate settings and found that women tend to speak up too soon before the group is frustrated enough. They may see a solution and they tend to speak up too soon and present a solution before the group is frustrated enough with themselves to be looking for solutions. And then later a man will say it, usually, not always, but get the credit for it, and she'll feel discounted. So you're absolutely right, Karen, having the understanding that groups have like a person, they're ready or not to hear a message at a certain time, and to be kind with yourself if your timing isn't the best. There's a really great book, I'm sorry I don't have on this list, but I'll mention it here, and I'll put it here. It's called Charisma, which I'll see if I can spell, Charisma. It's a little book by Michael Grinder. And it has a really lovely set of models, behavioral models called cats and dogs, on what your timing should be as part of the things that he covers. It's like, how do I deal with a group that's making a decision? And given the nature of this group, what's going to be a good time for me to offer an idea? So there are things we can learn about how to find a good timing with a group like that, and to make good interventions that are self-preserving and group-serving at the same time. So I would encourage you to check some of those resources out. Let's see. Finally, I want to talk about spiritual safety and actually mental safety as well. Sometimes when we feel anxious, we want to be affirmed. And we might be going into a group that has mixed views on things. So being able to kind of own that and say, I'm a little shaky right now about my belonging in this group. Maybe I have different ideas than the majority of the group does. How will I deal with that need to have my reality confirmed by the other people? So being able to track your own tolerance of difference as well as their tolerance of difference. And, activate your own resources. Know that there perhaps is a tribe where you do fit in and they do think like you. And that's a relatively safe place for you, and that you're bravely going into a place that people might have different ideas, and not personalizing that. Can be a really helpful kind of reset when you go into a group like that. There's a fellow named Jonathan Haidt is his name. He's a researcher on morality, And he's looked at people who have conservative views. There's been research done on people who have conservative views and people who have quote, liberal views. And there's differences in the way we think. There's differences in the way we, the things that resources that we use to feel safe. They've found that in the conservative mindset, authority is one of the factors of, like, I feel safe when somebody's in charge. That's a really different experience if you have a liberal way of using your brain and body, where you might feel safer if there's more diversity. So just understanding that these are differences and being able to be okay with yourself, bring your own resources into that situation, including spiritual resources, or knowing that you have a tribe where you do feel accepted. Those are really great resources for us to remember when we're in a situation that might be more challenging, so that we have that kind of sense of connection. It's like Allie's earlier suggestion, like somebody I can touch, or like somebody with me or something that makes me, that I can touch, that makes me feel good. This is like a spiritual and emotional touch of places that we're connected when we're going into a stranger place. So that's also a really great resources. So just as we start to come to the end of our time here, kind of putting this all together, physical safety, it's important to have discernment about the level of risk, to do planning, to take somebody with you if it might be unsafe, to find a well-lit area if you have to park your car at night. Foresight is really helpful in terms of helping us be at ease. Finding the door when you walk in the room, like my friend, the lawyer. Social emotional safety, being aware of your own food factors, for instance, your own family of origin biases, knowing that that's just your bias, being aware that there's an other who might be having a different experience, taking that step back so that you can actually keep your thinking alive and online when you need it. And, mental and spiritual safety, knowing what's important to you, knowing where you do feel safe, bringing spiritual and emotional resources with you, and, knowing that this group in this moment isn't everything. Those are all some of the factors in terms of helping yourself feel safer in a group. So, yeah, that kind of brings us to the end of our time here. I would love for questions and answers, or just some sharing from people on the webinar. What stands out for you? Things that have been useful, things that you might want to share, questions that you might still want to discuss. So the chat's open and we'd love to hear from you. I hope this silence means you're all busily thinking. Okay, let me just share some of these. Yeah, so it's good to have options. Intimate relationships. Yeah, some of these strategies are great for our close personal relationships as well. Thank you, Calendra, for pointing that out. Yeah. Maybe just share what things that stand out for you, or questions. We'd also love to hear if there's some topics you'd like us to discuss in the future. So take advantage of the chat right now. Let's see here. Self-compassion versus self-esteem. More on timing. That's an art right there. Michael Grinder's been one of my really helpful experts on understanding timing in groups. So I would definitely recommend his resources on that for sure. While you're thinking of things to say on the, thank you from, let's see, Glenda, mindfully breaking old family rules in a safe environment. Yeah, reality test them, see if they're really true. That's always a great strategy. Sure, thanks for that. While you're thinking of your comments for the chat, just want to say that they were doing these webinars as a way for you to kind of get acquainted with me, and in service of the Art of Facilitation training program that's coming up starting October 17th. This is a place where I bring all of my tools and skills and all the things that I've learned to bear on the art of facilitating relationships with other people, conversations with other people, constellation work, if that's your interest. It's a very skill-focused training, and we're really excited about it this year. So reading groups to know what they're ready for, as well as knowing one's own tolerance for difference. Thanks, Karen. Those are really important points. Yeah. Race is a big factor for sure. Ali's bringing that point. Right. It's not just our own safety, but also, sometimes we come into a group with really different lived experiences in our history, and how to handle that. Regarding Calendra's question about the course, there are both online and in-person aspects of the art of facilitation training. So there's 15 days in person, and then some online options in between. It's really a lovely, very intense, but very rich way to work. And some of the folks on the chat here have actually been through the training program, so they can share their views on things. Yeah, Jeannie's saying the chat format is pretty fast. It's partly why I'm actually trying to. So if you want to, Jeannie, you can ignore the chat, because I will usually bring those things into the conversation. So just pointing out, this idea, is the group really for you? Yeah, you can leave a group if it's not for you. Right, not making a level 5 commitment for everything. So that's a really great thing. Yeah, different facets of, yeah, Cindy's talking about the training, saying it's a great thing. Yeah, so is Sally. It's only live in the United States. Yep, right now I'm based on the farm. So, yeah, great. When am I coming to Australia? Probably not anytime soon. Though I was there, I've been there a couple times and loved it. Right. Social experiences in your family of origin can impact your experience of social groups right now. Kalendra, yes, it is. It's not it is residential in that you need to stay here. So there's 3 5-days that are spread over the course of about 9 months for the training program. And Cindy, I don't know if you've got a link that you can pop up in the chat for anyone that might be interested in the training program. My computer's not available right now. She'll just put it up there. The foo factors. Glenda's asking, what's the foo factor? The foo is what we call the family of origin. So the foo factor is your family of origin. What you learned really early on that might still be sticking with you even if you don't know it. And thanks, Sally, for your participation. All right. Well, let's see. I think Cindy's going to get that link for us. Any other questions, comments, topics you'd love to see us do a little webinar on? We'd love to have it. And there's the link if you're looking for the link to the training. Thanks, Susie. Yeah, great. All right. So, okay, Sidra. Yeah, so are you talking about the COG trauma webinar that we did? The trauma triggers webinar, Sidra? Okay. Yep, Cindy's on it. There's the RCOG link. It'll be there. So you can get that recording. And Cindy will send you the PowerPoint and a link to this one. At the moment, we don't have inner child training, but that's a great idea. We can look at it. And Edwina, Cindy also can send you information I think we have your email. So we'll send you the highlights and the recording and all that from these webinars for sure. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. And yeah, have a great evening or afternoon or morning, wherever you may be in the world. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.